My name is John Bridgeland. I graduated remarkably 40 years ago in 1978 from Indian Hill High School. I was in Indian Hill. It was just like this sea of opportunity. You know, you came into school and I played 4 sports, in part because the coaches were desperate for people on the teams. But some of them, you know, whether it was basketball or football or tennis, you really learned to work together as a team and not be, frankly, so selfish. And it's that sense of community that so many young people actually across the country don't have. That's like the foundation of, I think, love sports, and I was always on the move. And as a result, I actually didn't read as much, and felt like I was informed as much. And 9th grade comes along, and there's this teacher that most students were terrified of, Mrs. Steele. And she gave every student in the class an assignment and gave them a book to read and to do an oral project and written project on it. And when I got my little slip of paper, I was embarrassed I couldn't really read the author's name. It was Fyodor Dostoevsky, and it was Crime and Punishment. And it turned out to be the hardest book assigned. And when I completed that project, I went from feeling, you know what, I'm not that bright, I'm not that capable, and it completely flipped it for me. I had confidence. I got really interested in reading and studying, and Mrs. Steele turned me into someone who felt that I had really strong capabilities. So I had a mother who was not only a full-time volunteer from like elementary through middle school. She was like a battalion leader. I mean, she really had high expectations and supported you every step of the way. And a father who was president of the school board and head of the PTA, mayor, and just dedicated so much time, even though he was a busy lawyer, to like investing in the community, investing in us. And then my 4 older sisters, Debbie, Cindy, Becky, and Alicia, who, you know, each marched successfully through the high school, laid the groundwork. So when I came into classes with new teachers, they'd say, "Oh, that's a Bridgeland," and like it was going to be largely okay. I've always wanted to go into public service. And I grew up at a very exciting time. It was also a kind of a revolutionary time, but extremely exciting, where you saw extraordinary men and women in public life who were changing the country and changing the world. I went and worked on Capitol Hill as his chief of staff and lawyer, and he treated me like a peer, and together we wrote 9 bills that were signed into law, and because it was bipartisan. I had the privilege of serving for President Bush as his director of the White House Domestic Policy Council, and thought it was going to be one job, and then 9/11 hit. So we then were evacuated I was sent to the President's Emergency Operations Center below, which is the bunker below the White House, built to sustain a nuclear attack. And I was there with the Vice President and the Secretary of Transportation, and Condi Rice, and other members of the senior team, and literally watched the Secretary of Transportation ground every plane coming into the United States. I literally brought the declaration for the President to sign to release aid to the Pentagon, New York City, and this town we would later learn was Shanksville, Pennsylvania, to release all the federal aid back to the White House. And then he signed and released the aid. And so my job went from overseeing domestic policy on more than 100 issues, from education and faith-based and national parks and food safety and a whole host of issues, to being in the Situation Room 3 times a day. The emotional shift in the country was remarkable. And so I'm in the Oval Office the 3rd day after, and President Bush looks at me and says, "Bridge, I want you to create an initiative," I'll never forget his words, "an initiative that will foster a culture of service, citizenship, and responsibility," and then he added, "for decades to come." And so we created this initiative called the Freedom Corps that provided over 1 million opportunities for Americans to do. They could do Peace Corps or City Year or Teach for America, Habitat for Humanity. They could serve through their faith-based institutions. They could volunteer. And he issues this 2-year call to service in the 2002 State of the Union address. It taught me this lesson that people want to be asked to serve. They want to be kind of awakened out of their ordinary lives to do something extraordinary for the country. So after I left the White House, I wanted to do what I had done in the White House, but in the private sector without as much of the politics and to see if that was actually possible. Fully preventable and treatable disease called malaria that was killing more than 1.2, mostly women and children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa. And then we started a nonprofit called Malaria No More. And the results have been 7 million lives saved since we started it. The second big area of interest has been this high school dropout epidemic, where we discovered that 1.2 million young people were dropping out of high school, and it was devastating to their lives. And then they would often go on to have children who in turn would live in poverty and drop out of high school and not have any socio-economic mobility. And so we did this nationally representative survey of young people who had dropped out across the country. And I went into Philadelphia, and this girl who was 18 at the time, she had dropped out at 16, took over the whole focus group. And when we asked her, what did you want to be in life? She said, I wanted to be an astrophysicist. And we said, a what? And she said, I was inspired by the space program, and I wanted to be an astrophysicist. 30 minutes later in the conversation, we asked the same little girl, what are you doing now? And her head dips down, and she says, I'm working the streets of Philadelphia. She was literally a prostitute on the streets of Philadelphia. And I know that's sort of a dramatic example, but it was at that moment that our group and the Gates Foundation and other people we were working with said that through the voices of young people, and all these young people, the vast majority of them could have made it. They have big dreams, just like the kids I just met with here at Indian Hill who have extraordinary dreams. And, you know, we need to provide the kind of supports in those schools where they're trapped for them to realize those dreams. We're working to bring the national park idea to the ocean because 100-some years ago, this big idea to put large tracts of land into federal custody for the protection and enjoyment and use of future generations was called America's Best Idea. That same energy and idea to the oceans. Big opportunity is actually the high seas. If we could protect what E.O. Wilson calls half Earth, we could really provide a much better planet for generations down the road. My last project that I'm probably as passionate about as anything I've ever done is this big idea that to create a common expectation and a common opportunity for 18 to 28-year-olds, young people as they come of age, to have a year of national service. Democracy that's not founded on, you know, a monarch or even a plot of land, but an idea of big citizenship. You know, our democracy will only be healthy if we jump in and all have that ethic. I'm an enthusiastic supporter of the Indian Hill Foundation, and I have been for years, because I recognize that this community and these schools gave so much to me, and without it, I wouldn't have the opportunities in life that I've had. And if we can step forward and contribute to ensure that these ripples of hope that we're sending out through our support touch so many additional lives, we'll be able to look back and see stronger communities, not just here, but all across the country and all across the world.